Hello everybody and welcome to today's lecture in honour of our late founder Robert Oakeshott. I'm Chris Mcdermott, I'm the chair of the EOA and I'm also the managing director of Cambridge Weight Plan. And I know that everybody would have been here today expecting Deb Oxley to be speaking, but unfortunately she's had to attend a family health emergency. So as chair of the EOA, it's my job to welcome you all to the event today and to introduce you to Campbell McDonald, Interim Chief Executive of Ownership at Work, the independent charitable think tank and research partner to the Employee Ownership Association, who has very, very graciously and at very short notice agreed to step in to host today's event. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Campbell and listening to Campbell, and also, of course, from the lecture of the Right Honourable Jessie Norman MP. And I'll also have the opportunity at the end of that to share some of my thoughts on where the EOA is and the future of the organisation. And also, as a very special treat today, we've also got Kevin Shillington, who is Robert Oakeshott's biographer, and he'll be joining us a little bit later on. But for now, I'd like to welcome everybody to this event and hand over to Campbell.
Yep, many thanks, Chris. Much appreciated. Welcome, everybody. Look, as Chris said, I am standing in for Deb. So whilst I will clearly not fill Deb's shoes, I'm going to do my very best. I have some splendid speaking notes that Deb had already put together, which I am going to do my very best to do justice to. And that's going to include some thank yous. It's going to include a bit of a heads up on EO Week and a bit of housekeeping. And then I'm going to introduce our principal speakers. So let me crack on. So look, this is an enormously special event for the sector. Today, we are hugely grateful to Robert Oakeshott's family that they were happy and comfortable with us holding the lecture today, because it is the 10th anniversary of Robert passing today. So hopefully the next hour and a half, we're going to really commemorate Robert's life. We're going to celebrate his legacy, and as it feels entirely appropriate, we are going to talk about the ambitions for what employee ownership can achieve over the next 10 years and reflect a little on what we've achieved in the last 10 years. I'd like to up front just thank EOA trustee member Gripple, who are supporting today's event. Thank you very much. I'd like to explicitly say thanks to Robert's family. It's a really significant day for you. And listen, I hope our conversation does the day justice. Right, so then just a few practical bits and pieces about the upcoming week. Today is the start of a crazy flurry of employee ownership activity this week, which culminates in EO Day on Friday, where EOA members across the country are going to be raising awareness of what employee ownership means to their businesses and using stories to really champion the sector. We've got a fantastic headline event tomorrow, which is launching something called the Ownership Hub, which is a collaboration between EOA and Cooperatives UK, and is a project working with specific economic regions on growing employee and worker ownership. So it's part of the 1 million work owners campaign, which I hope that people have heard of, which is trying to drive a sort of 5-fold increase in the number of employee and worker owners in the UK by 2030. I think all of us really think that Robert would have just loved this approach. He was a big champion of worker co-ops alongside employee ownership. And his views on both of those were wonderfully articulated in his influential books, A Case for Worker Cooperatives, as well as Jobs and Fairness, The Logic and Experience of Employee Ownership. Later this week, we've got the latest in our series, the EOA series of ESG webinars, and this one's covering the G on governance. That's critical. I'd be amazed if some of those governance issues didn't come up in our discussions today. Still time to book your place on that event. And this week we're going to get the latest breakdown on growth and stats on the sector, and frankly they are remarkable. So at the risk of stealing thunder, what we can see. So we're going to publish the top 50 employee-owned businesses by size, which is collated by RM2 every year and reveals growth in sales and employment. And then alongside that, the well-known White Rose Centre have got a fantastic set of stats that show unprecedented growth. 730 businesses in the sector. Q1 of this year was the busiest ever for particularly EOT transitions. 72 businesses in that quarter transitioning into our employee-owned model. So tremendously exciting week ahead. Just slowing down for a moment then, I want to come back to just reflect on, I think we all hope, all of us kind of around, kind of trying to drive the growth of the sector, really hope that Robert would be proud, particularly proud of how the EOA has evolved over the last decade. And this week, for the first time, EOA membership has hit and exceeded 500 members. So that's a huge achievement. I'm going to say this because I don't know if Deb would have, but I mean, absolute hats off to Deb, to the whole of the EOA team who've been driving this over the last few years. We've really seen those numbers just ramp up. So that's absolutely fantastic. Just to kind of reflect a little further on Robert, kind of 2009, Sir Stuart Hampson, who was EOA president then, as well as chair of the John Lewis Partnership, made the following observation. He said that Robert has been a genuinely unique pioneer of employee ownership, and a pioneer not just in the UK, but in the world. And I think what we've all come to realize is that he really has inspired a generation of pioneers who became some of the first to really transition their businesses into employee ownership. And through all those efforts of the EOA, these pioneers are now able to share their insight, their best practice, their warts and all accounts of becoming employee owned, and really helping EOA to share learning and start to really put meat onto what good employee ownership looks like. I think all of us in the sector know that the introduction of the EOT in 2014 was a real game changer in the UK. We've seen that growth accelerating year on year since then, mainly SMEs, family-owned businesses using it as a succession solution, but also notable bigger businesses, larger enterprises, Richer Sounds, Aardman Animation, CTech and the like, really kind of leading the charge now. And off the back of that, the UK really is the pioneer for this model at this point. And we can see that interest being driven into the US in terms of picking up the EOT model as a complement to what they already have. We see it in Ireland, we see it in Canada, we see it in Australia. So the UK really is the world leader on this. Now, Deb has very kindly put in a reference here to the think tank, the new think tank in the sector called Ownership at Work, which I'm currently chief executing, and I'm telling you that she put it in so you don't think I've smuggled in an advert for the think tank myself. But the Ownership at Work is basically picking up the charge to work with partners, to work with academic partners, to work with the likes of Nigel Mason at RM2, with Andrew Robinson at White Rose, with others, to really fill gaps in the evidence base, in the knowledge available around the model, coming up with new ideas and fresh thinking to challenge the policy environment. We published a paper very recently on how employee ownership might be used as a lever to support businesses who are hitting the wall because of COVID debt. You know, the sector is really starting to build and grow in terms of its maturity here. And as we move on, having accomplished a great deal in 10 years, I think it's absolutely right that we use today to reflect on that decade since we lost Robert, but actually what can we do to continue to build on his legacy and drive forward progress over the next 10 years. So that we're about to move on to the main event, to the lecture. A few little bits of housekeeping, and then I will do my best to introduce our speaker. So please put questions in the usual fashion into the kind of Q&A function. I think it's Q&A rather than chat. EOA colleagues will be putting some useful reminders in there and directing people to the right bit of that. So look, after the lecture, there's going to be a bit of virtual networking. And I know we're sort of missing our face-to-face, but we're going to be using a tool called Remo. Again, EOA colleagues will be putting links into the chat so that people can pick that up and do that. And you can kind of move between virtual tables and share thoughts. I think there'll be a lot to pick at. And final bit for me is to try and introduce our guest speaker. So as everyone will know, our main speaker today is the Right Honourable Jesse Norman MP. He's going to be joined by EOA Chair, who you saw at the beginning of the event, Chris Mcdermott, who's going to offer a little response to what Jesse says. Jesse, I'm terribly sorry. I've known you for a little while. I'm going to be shamelessly familiar and refer to you as Jesse. I hope that's okay. Look, most of you will know that Jesse's been the MP for Hereford and South Herefordshire since 2010. You might also know that he was appointed Financial Secretary to the Treasury in 2019. In that role, he's responsible for HMRC, tax policy, national infrastructure strategy, UK infrastructure bank, amongst other things. However, important to say that Jesse is not here today in his ministerial role. He's here really as a pretty much lifelong friend of Robert. He was also a previous board member of Job Ownership Ltd, which became the EOA, and previously chaired the all-party parliamentary group on employee ownership. Jesse, we're truly delighted to have you here today. Deb's got some bullets here from your CV as well, which I'll throw out there so other people can get a sense of the wider you. So, you know, degree in classics from Oxford, philosophy from UCL. You hold a number of honorary fellowships. You've been a visiting fellow at All Souls College in Oxford. You've authored numerous books and pamphlets yourself, not least Compassionate Conservatism, Edmund Burke, great book. I've read that one. Adam Smith, and that latter book won you the Parliamentary Book Awards in 2018. And finally, having edited and published Nuts and Bolts, a book on how to set up a food cooperative. So there's not a lot of ways in which you're not massively qualified to be our speaker today, Jesse. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on employee ownership and sharing your recollections. And may I now hand over to you.
Well, thank you very, very much indeed, Campbell, for that wonderfully kind introduction. I don't think anyone can survive an introduction as nice as that one, and I won't try to, but thank you. And thank you, EOA, and congratulations to you on your new ownership hub. And thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us now at this 10th Robert Oakeshott Memorial Lecture. It's a fantastic honor because, of course, it's in Robert's name, because of the distinction of the previous speakers in this series. But it's also, I think, especially important and poignant because it comes a decade to the day from the date of Robert's own death. And I think it allows us, that decade, to see perhaps more clearly than at his death what his legacy has been and how it is shaping up. As Campbell said, I'm speaking in a private capacity now, and that's a great thing. It means I can give you a few of my own personal opinions rather than speaking as a minister or from a treasury perspective. So if I may, let me be clear from the start. This is a talk, it's not a lecture. There is something absurd about the idea of a Robert Oakeshott lecture. Robert could certainly be didactic. I don't think there's much doubt about that, but he would never really have dreamt of lecturing anyone about anything, unless perhaps there was a very great moral issue at stake and he had had an extra glass or two of vino tinto. I think those are the key conditions precedent to any kind of a Robert Oakeshott lecture. No, Robert's preferred mode was always that of a conversation, and he was a master of conversation. It was something he shared with the great philosopher Michael Oakeshott. Cousin Michael, as Robert used to refer to him rather airily from time to time, with perhaps a slightly raised eyebrow at Michael Oakeshott's conservative instincts. Although in fact, Michael's liberalism was not so very different and not so very distant from Robert's. Michael Oakeshott, in his philosophy, made conversation into a metaphor for liberal human society, and indeed for civilization itself. That is because in a conversation, all are considered presumptively as equals. What matters is not the status of the speaker, not their rank or wealth, but the content of what is said, the distinctiveness and the individuality of the voices, and the richness of the interplay between them. There is no hierarchy as such in a conversation. Robert never had much taste, I think it's fair to say, for the abstractions of philosophy, but a conversation with him was always an intense pleasure. And although he would never have wanted to lecture you, it was also always an education. As for me, I knew Robert Oakeshott for more than 40 years, and let's make no bones about it, I loved him. I'm sure you all of those who knew him at least, loved Robert Oakeshott too. This was the effect he had on almost everyone around him, whether it was his transparent goodness, his extreme friendliness, his personal modesty and lack of affectation, or his willingness to take arms against a sea of troubles and make the impossible possible through his own persistent charm and effort. Or whether it was all these things together, Robert was, in his own way, quite irresistible. So I was certainly completely incapable of any resistance when I returned from working in America in 1991, and Robert asked me to join the board of Job Ownership Ltd, the predecessor to the Employee Ownership Association. Since Robert knew everyone, he knew my parents. That went without saying. What I had not realized, however, was that he also knew my future parents-in-law, Tom and Elizabeth Bingham. And indeed, this is no joke, he was the godfather to my future brother-in-law. That, ladies and gentlemen, is networking at its finest. In fact, I rather think that my father-in-law, Tom Bingham, who, as you know, became an astonishingly distinguished judge, was the junior common room president at Balliol College, Oxford, in 1956, the year in which Robert led a Balliol mission with medical supplies to support Hungary in the face of the Russian invasion. It's important to say, making this up. Anyhow, sometime in the early 1990s, Robert called me up and in his usual way suggested a medium numbers lunch. Jesse, join me. Well, come and have, I don't think we can stretch to a high numbers lunch, Jesse, he would say, but I think we can do medium numbers, eh, what? And we went, of course, to the Gay Hussar, where he recommended the chilled wild cherry soup and the smoked goose breast. And that was that. My goose, at least, was cooked. I knew nothing about employee ownership and not much about anything else. But for reasons too complex to explain, I had found myself doing a series of what Robert would have called knight's moves, from helping to set up Institutional Shareholder Services, the world's first corporate governance advisory business in Washington, DC, to working in the Eurobond markets on Wall Street, to running a charitable project, giving away educational materials and building free institutions across communist Eastern Europe. Ownership, finance, rapid economic and social transformation. In retrospect, the overlaps seem a lot more compelling than they did at the time. At any rate, this frankly rather slender personal base of personal experience was the only hook that Robert needed to pull me in. Mind you, I could have been ignorant in an almost indefinite array of other areas, and I suspect I would still have got the call. I still remember our early board meetings rather vividly. They took place at the Unitary Trust Bank, courtesy of the great Gordon Beasley, and around the table, in addition to Robert and Gordon himself, there were David Erdle, James Cornford, David Wheatcroft, Margaret Elliott, I think David Walker from John Lewis, and I think also Graham Nuttall. It was a very brilliant and a very eclectic group, gathered up by Robert during his travels. As for me, I had stayed focused on Eastern Europe, but I had gone to work for BZW, the Barclays Investment Bank. And I had a fairly vivid sense of being not just 20 years younger, at least than everyone else at the table, but on the wrong side of what might be called the capitalism-socialism divide. Of course, that made no difference to Robert at all. Indeed, he thought of employee ownership as healing that ancient divide between labour and capital. As I look back on it, I recall going with him in 1995 to visit Michael Jack, one of my predecessors as financial secretary at the Treasury, in what is my present office. In fact, I'm sitting in it right now, in order to pitch some employee ownership idea. But that was just the latest in a succession of visits that Robert had made to very senior ministers in the government, and in particular in the Treasury. And then there was that amazing conference on employee ownership that he organized in Hungary in 1996, which took place next to Lake Balaton in the depths of winter. The lake was completely frozen, and somehow one expected Frankenstein's monster to emerge out of the night across the ice. And that visit also included an almost equally memorable visit to the employee-owned Herent Pottery Works. And then, of course, there was my fervent advice to Robert not to invest his life savings in a Bulgarian vineyard, since he would have no security and virtually no protections in law, advice he typically and very wisely ignored. Robert knew what the right thing to do was. If I may, I now want to jump forward a little bit to consider the state of employee ownership at the time of his death 10 years ago. I do not think I exaggerate if I say that for all those decades of hard work, even in 2011, employee ownership was still little understood and less practiced, with a few signal exceptions. There was not much by way of resources to support employee ownership, and there was virtually no understanding of its possibilities and potential among business. And it had no traction amongst the professional advisors. There were worries about overexposure of employees to risk and access to capital. Employee ownership was seen as complicated and esoteric, something for hobbyists, cranks and specialists, and frankly, there wasn't enough money in it to be worth the professional's while. But it is in the nature of revolutions to see periods of stasis followed by rapid change. Since that time, I think it is fair to say that there has been a transformation. Following the Nuttall Review of 2012, the coalition government adopted the employee ownership trust model alongside a range of other incentives in place. It also, as you may recall, made a huge fuss about the John Lewis partnership. For those of us who recall the decades in which JLP and a small number of other companies underwrote Job Ownership Ltd, and indeed much of the EO research sector, this felt like just recognition for all that commitment and support. But it also obscured, of course, just how unusual the John Lewis partnership actually is. It turned out that there were literally hundreds of other opportunities to develop and adapt an employee-owned trust model without having to feel the whole thing required all of the extraordinary structures, practices of participation that has sustained JLP. That's one of the lessons of the last 10 years. In particular, of course, the Employee Ownership Trust has taken off. Since its introduction in 2014, some 567 businesses have become employee-owned via an Employee Ownership Trust. The rate of growth has increased significantly just in the past 2 years, with 139 transitions to employee ownership via an Employee Ownership Trust in 2020 and a further 72 transitions in the first quarter of 2021. So employee ownership trusts have been pivotal, but the changes have gone much wider than that. Looking back now, we can see that for the first time, employee ownership has been clearly distinguished from employee share ownership. Employee ownership itself has become government policy. Employee engagement has become understood as a core part of employee ownership, not some accidental or lucky add-on. And above all, the employee ownership business model has become recognized as a successful commercial business model in and of itself, independent of any tax treatment. Thanks in large part to the EOA and to JOL before it, we now have numerous case studies and success stories and a considerable accumulated body of research. It is notable that employee ownership has started to percolate more into the universities and business schools. The Employee Ownership Trust has become both a default model for employee ownership in this country, and it has also served as a model to others, and moreover allowed the creation of what is in effect a toolkit for professionals so that it can be swiftly and effectively implemented. And last but not least, there are a vastly larger range of champions around the country, and perhaps especially in Scotland, to sing the praises and also vitally to explain the detail of employee ownership. And there's been one other, I would say, important development. Employee ownership and its cousins, cooperatives and mutuals, are no longer seen as politically loaded. It made a huge difference that these decisive changes were created and launched under a Conservative-led coalition government, nominally committed at least to inclusive Burkean ideas through the language of the big society, and faced by an opposition, many of whose MPs were and are formally part of the Cooperative Party. If I was being mischievous, I might also suggest that the gradual weakening of the trade union movement has given space for the re-emergence of employee ownership on the left. But by whatever means, the UK has finally joined the rest of the world, and in particular that bastion of capitalism, the United States of America, in welcoming all these different models of enterprise and doing so on their merits without regarding them as moves in a political or class game. I do not want to suggest for one moment that there is not further work to be done. Employee-owned businesses are still a tiny proportion of the firms in this country after all. And as Graham Nuttall reminds me, there is a case for some tweaks to the legislation in order to improve employee engagement and discharge better the policy intent of the Employee Ownership Trust. First of all, there's a suggested requirement that the Employee Ownership Trust trustee must be resident in the United Kingdom to protect the trust from onward sales overseas. And secondly, a requirement that former major shareholders should not form a majority of the trustees or trustee directors. And finally, the inclusion in the legislation of an express statement of the purpose of an employee ownership trust as being to promote long-term employee ownership. I will, as they say, refer these important suggestions to the relevant minister at the Treasury. But what I am struck by, perhaps even more than I am struck by these developments, is the wider change of ethos that we have seen over the past 10 years. It is very striking how the emergence of new technology companies has helped to fuel interest in employee share ownership, and in some cases, in the merits of employee ownership in the full sense. The whole topic of ESG, environmental, social, and governance impact, has moved to the center of the business stage. And employee ownership, as Campbell has mentioned, can, and I'm sure will be, at the heart of that debate. There is a much wider focus on the benefits of employee engagement and flat organizational structures, and on the importance of corporate mission, and in particular, the desire to live cooperatively and sustainably and inclusively while going about one's usual business. Those things have become paramount, especially to the younger generation. I do not think that this is for a moment the product of any single human being or organization, even of Robert and the EOT. But they, indeed you, have played your parts as much or more than anyone in helping to set the terms for this astonishing change. Other changes will come, and there are other pressures on good work and good business, but I suspect that this change will be irreversible. The evil genie of organizational hierarchy, of exclusion and hostility between management and employees, so evident 30 years ago, is very plainly in retreat. As for myself, over the past 15 years, I've found myself writing a book on the philosophy and practice of the big society, setting up a thing called the Conservative Cooperative Movement, commissioning and editing a handbook on how to set up a food co-op, and chairing the APPG on employee ownership. Graham has even suggested that the germ of the Nuttall Review lay in a challenge I once made to him at an all-party group reception, from which came a note and then a memorandum to the Treasury and so much else. However that may be, it is inconceivable that I myself would have been able or inspired to do any of this without Robert. And I suspect that that same fact, that same experience will be true for many of you watching this now. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us all cast our eyes skyward to heaven. Let us think of Robert up there, gently and persistently charming Gabriel and the angels into setting up workers' cooperatives and employee-owned businesses. And let us raise a virtual glass of vino tinto to honor his memory, or perhaps, as he would wish, a real glass later on. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Jesse. I think this is the moment which should be filled with some applause. So let me verbally applaud. What a lovely set of words, some wonderful sentiments, and some glimpses into Robert for those of us who didn't have the privilege of knowing him, and some inspiring thoughts about where employee ownership has been and starting to push to where it might go. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Chris Mcdermott. So Chris is going to pick up and do something like a sort of short formal response to some of what you've said, and I will then come back in, and we're going to start then putting some questions to you. We're already getting a couple coming through in the Q&A, so do please keep those coming. I know that you're only able to stay with us, I think, till 2:10, Jesse. So we will work to that timing. So without further ado, let me hand over to Chris. Chris.
Thank you, Campbell, and thank you, Jesse. That was quite beautiful, actually, those words and the sentiment, and I was very struck and actually quite moved by the journey that you've been on, the journey that Robert went on, and the place in which we find ourselves now here in 2021. And I think something that resonated very strongly with me was this idea of employee ownership on its merits. So rather than it be something that is politically charged or motivated by other elements to it, this idea that actually on its own, without all the other things that might come with it, without the tax breaks and without all of those sort of things, actually employee ownership standing on its merits as an idea, as a concept that can do some of this work between healing this divide between labor and capital. I think that really is a very strong message and certainly resonated with myself. I'm charged, along with the rest of the EOA, to be thinking about the future and to be thinking about where we might find ourselves at this lecture in 10 years' time. And we've been doing a lot of work around the strategy of the EOA to think about where it is now, where it's got to, the things it's achieved, but really what it can do and where it should be going. And this idea of EO on its merits, this idea of making employee ownership totally mainstream, totally a normal thing that people consider when they're starting a business or consider when they are thinking of selling a business. That, I suppose, is certainly something I'm very committed to, and I believe that the EOA is as well. This idea that we can go into the future and unlock the amazing potential using employee ownership and using the EOA for our people, individuals, businesses, and the economy. And with people, we're looking at, I know there's lots of people here watching this today who are in employee ownership businesses, so they'll know how employee ownership can unlock the potential of people and individuals within those organizations, giving them a much greater say in the way that they work, in the work that they do, in the quality of the work they do, and as importantly, a stake in the success of their business and a responsibility for the success of that business. So a collective sense that we're going to take something and we're going to make it better and we're going to make it bigger and more successful. And I think certainly the pandemic has demonstrated just how resilient employee-owned businesses are when things really get tough and things get really difficult. And I think that's the power and unlocking the potential of people and individuals. Then, of course, there's this idea of unlocking the potential for business, so greater levels of productivity across the country, innovation and success, making better places to work, more sustainable, real communication between people, and a real sense of shared ownership. And again, I think the pandemic and the experiences that we've had during the pandemic have really shone a light on some of those innovative ideas, and certainly with employee ownership businesses, how you can really communicate very well and you can communicate very clearly because you've built a lot of structure when the chips are down, when things are not going to plan, and you need to act very quickly. And then unlocking the potential for the economy, for our country as a whole, building an economy and a country that's greater resilience, got much greater resilience and much greater equality. And so we've taken this unlocking potential piece, we're looking at it from the outside, we're looking at what we can do across the country, but we're also doing exactly the same internally as well. So the team led by Deb is thinking about how can the Employee Ownership Association unlock the potential of its message and its proposition. How can it be empowered to really reach out to already its members, but also to new prospective people who might be looking to join. So we're looking to be much more ambitious, and we're looking to grow the offer to members. That's very, very important for us in the coming years that we've got. We've got to do lots of work around that. We want to represent the interests of all of our members right across the spectrum and provide services that they need to grow, learn, and prosper. And I think the EO conference, although we're not having physical ones at the moment, but when you go to an EO conference, and I remember my very first EO conference where I was a terrible skeptic about the whole concept of employee ownership. I thought it was I didn't realize at the time, but I came from a very sort of capitalist-minded world, and I thought the Employee Ownership Association conference was going to be sort of like a socialist utopia's dream, and everybody was going to be talking about socialist type ideas, only to get there to realize that it's full of brilliant people running incredibly different and exciting businesses, but just doing it in a slightly different way, and doing it, I certainly bought into the idea very quickly of doing it in a better way. So I think we've got to, as the EOA's organization, has got to be able to represent those interests, provide those services, so that those people and new people coming into it can grow, learn, and prosper and share their experiences. And I think the other thing we need to do as part of this unlocking potential is to be the go-to place for everyone and anyone who wants to know more about employee ownership, whether that be businesses, people who are thinking about making the transition, advisors, of course, professional bodies and professional advisors, and the media and the government. So there's lots for us to be getting into, and there's lots of us for us to be thinking about over the next 10 years. It's been quite a, I mean, obviously listening to Jesse now and doing some of the research and reading about the journey of employee ownership, it has been quite an experience. It has been quite a thing to grow. It's quite an interesting idea. It's an idea that when you try and explain it to people who don't understand it, you can see the fire in their eyes sort of light up when they think, oh yeah, I get that. Companies actually do this kind of thing. They actually embrace this kind of mindset, and their businesses that have to operate in a very fast-moving capitalist environment. Absolutely, that is the epitome of EO businesses. And I think as we develop and go forward in the next 10 years, the idea is to try and make it as mainstream as we possibly can, to really embed it into society, that people think actually employee ownership is not some niche thing, it's not some wacky idea, it's real, proper, sensible way of running a business, but doing it in a very modern and contemporary way. And the other thing that, one of the things that we're going to need and build upon, as Jesse mentioned, is the evidence, and building the evidence base so that we can demonstrate. It's easy to say employee ownership is a good thing. It's harder to show it. And I think that's where we need the evidence in the next 10 years as well, to build this great big body of work to say we can absolutely 100% say, if you're an employee-owned business, this will be the sort of things that will happen to you. You'll see an increase in productivity. You'll see more people engaged in the business. You'll see more ideas, more innovation. And Ownership at Work, which Campbell is the interim chair, is one of those bodies and one of those organizations that's striving to get that information and to build that data. So one of the things that we'll be encouraging all EO members to do, and the association itself, is to work with Ownership at Work to build that evidence base and to build that work going forward. So there's a lot going on in the Employee Ownership Association. There's a lot obviously going on in all of our businesses around the country. There's a lot going on in the country. But my final piece really to everybody and to Jesse is to say that I just love this idea of healing the Great Divide. I'd never really thought about it like that, but that really has resonated with me. And I think what we do as business leaders and business people is entirely that. We understand that there are these two interesting, sometimes conflicting entities, and we understand and know how to heal that and how to bridge those gaps. And sometimes it's really difficult, and sometimes we don't get it right. In fact, a lot of the times we're not getting it all right, and we're always building and trying and adapting and changing. But I think that concept of bridging those gaps between those two things is a very noble thing for us to be buying into, and a very noble thing for us to strive to do over the next 10 years as we really unlock the potential of employee ownership and really make it absolutely mainstream. So back to you, Campbell.
Thanks very much for that, Chris. And as I said before, other think tanks are available. I did not prompt Chris to promote our work, but thank you, Chris. It's much appreciated. Right, we've got some fantastic questions coming in. Thank you both for staying on and taking on some of these. So my first question, which is currently the most popular, we've got a system here, Jesse, where people can tick a question or give it a thumbs up. So I've got a sense of which are the ones people most keen on hearing answers to. And I'm going to put this one to you, and I'm going to do it with a little apology. So I know that you are not here with your ministerial hat on, but I am afraid that the will of the crowd is to hear any insight you might have on what kind of a role government can play, do you think, in sort of setting that context for this continued growth and getting us from, 750 right up into, sort of thousands of EO businesses in the economy. And within that, I think particularly what role the regions and local government can play. I think there's some really interesting thinking going on around the ways in which employee ownership should be a constituent part of supporting that levelling up and that creating of fairness across local economies. I think it can play a big role. So over to you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Campbell, and thank you, Chris, for those very thoughtful further remarks. Let me just, if I may, pick up a couple of points that Chris made, and then I'll come to the question that you've raised, Campbell. So I think, Chris, you were absolutely right, and I was delighted that you picked out some of those thoughts, not just the Labour versus capital thought, which is a kind of 1960s, 70s, 80s idea, but very much one that sat at the heart of Robert's thinking about this, as kind of going to the core of the problem, if you like. But also the point about employee ownership succeeding on its merits. And I think one of the things that the last 10 years has shown us is that the treatment within the tax system, if you get it right, can have an enormously important effect, not necessarily in, as it were, it's only in its direct effects, but also because it creates a category that professionals have to engage with. You start to become subject to criticism if you are a tax advisor or an accountant and someone's selling a business and you haven't raised this point with them because of the tax treatment involved. And therefore it acts as quite an important nudge in a way that the previous tax treatment of different share schemes, etc., did not. I think that's quite important. But the point is that at some point, and of course, let's be clear, all businesses have different forms of tax advantage in different ways, but at some point, employee-owned firms need to be able to replicate and spread themselves, and the ethos needs to be able to expand without progressive support or stimulus from government or from anyone else. And I think that takes us into some further quite interesting thoughts. If you look at other countries, the reason I made that slightly pointed remark about the UK is that, you know, you might think that the US as the home of capitalism would be hostile to co-ops. Absolutely not. You might think it would be hostile to employee-owned businesses. Well, in many ways, much longer and better record than the UK. And I do think that, therefore, and of course in Europe, both these traditions and the tradition of mutuals are also in many ways well established, even if we have in some respects stolen a march with the employee ownership trust. But I do think, therefore, that there's a degree of catching up in the way in which our wider public understanding of these things develops, and that's what we're trying to do. And it's not as though we don't have great models. I mean, take a model that people won't really have focused on necessarily here, but take Welsh Water. So Welsh Water is a company limited by guarantee. Hold on a second. Under orthodox, as it were, capitalist doctrine, the ability to sell shares in a company is foundational to its ability to raise capital, and its ability to raise capital is essential to being a utility. So how can you have a water utility which doesn't have any share capital? It's a company limited by guarantee. Well, the answer is go and look at Welsh Water. It's an astonishing organization, very much with a mutual ethos, as you'll know. So I do think there are things that are not dreamt of, and that takes me to what I think we can do. I don't think, my own view is, I'm not going to talk about government policy, I'm afraid, contrary to the question and in defiance of the crowd, but I do think there's a tremendous opportunity for EO organizations, for those who are sympathetic to it, and for local authorities, mayoralties and the like, to pick up these ideas and to ask themselves at a local level, what's the kind of culture that they want to have in their area? Leveling up is not just about improvements in productivity and in economic growth. It's also about a sense of place. What is home for me? What is something that really distinguishes where I am and my home from anywhere else on the planet? And I think employee ownership can be a really important part of that sense of ethos, and it has proved to be so in different parts of the world already. And the final point I would make is that leveling up is also going in part to be about recapitalization of parts of society that may have very limited access to capital. And I think employee ownership can be a very important part of that as well. And so in many ways, what it comes down to is whether these lower levels of governance, local authorities, mayoralties and the like, have a sense of ownership of their own, have a sense of where they want to see their own local society and their villages, their cities, their towns developing, and how employee ownership can be made to work in that. And I think it's a very powerful and strong message that could be had there. And if you ask me, what can the members of EOA do? They can get out there and start proselytizing. And I think there is a massive scope for all of the, as it were, niche instincts that EO has grown out of to come back into play in nudging other people to understand the benefits and the merits of the model.
Thank you very much, Jesse, yeah, some great thoughts and elegantly sidestepping the central thrust of the question. So Chris, the question does say it's a question to the whole panel, but I'm conscious that we have limited time with Jesse. So I might just, if you have any response on behalf of sort of EOA, if you like, to that point about kind of government role, yeah, given we've got Jesse, but maybe keep time short and we'll try and get as many questions to Jesse as possible after that, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I think that's a really good point around local issues, local government, local minorities. Certainly in my own experience here in Corby, it's something that we've engaged in quite a bit, but there's a lot of work to do there to kind of explain the model and explain what it is and what it isn't. But I think that's a really strong vein of work that we could mine going forward, because there is this sense of place, and certainly speaking to lots of people who work in the employee-owned sector, they are very proud of where they are. They're very proud of their roots in those communities, and they feel that, and they're very proud to be able to share those experiences with others. So I think there's a lot to do there, and I think that's a really good point that the EOA needs to possibly think about.
Can I come back in for a second on that, Chris? Because I thoroughly agree. Let me just say a couple of things. Obviously, in my talk, I included 3 tweaks to the employee ownership trust model, which government could look at and that Graham has suggested. And that goes some way to addressing the question. But the point you've just raised is absolutely right. Let's just take some government programs that are already in progress at the moment. We've got the Stronger Towns Funds, 101 towns up and down the country, which have essentially been brought to the point of setting up independent boards, not dominated by their local councils, with the purpose of thinking in a really coherent and engaged way about what the future should be for them, including environmental and heritage and economic and other place-based questions. So those 101 towns are all thinking, what can a future investment portfolio look like based on what we're like? I think there's every possibility that you could go in and pitch some of those guys about saying, your place, you're now thinking really hard about place. Government in many cases has given you £25 million to accelerate your investment plans. You've got private investment lined up. Why not think about the role of employee ownership in that? In the way that you might think about, for example, the role of indie food outlets, or different parts of the kind of ethos of a place. And then the levelling up money that's coming through the levelling up fund, there will be different layers of that. Each one of those potentially, again, encourages local areas to think about what they would need to do. EO, the great genius of this from an agenda point of view from EOA would be to make sure that every levelling up bid that's successful is thinking in terms of, or indeed the ones that become successful, are thinking in terms of an employee ownership component as they think about their own areas and their own places. I think those are going to be the kinds of hooks into which this can really start to spread quite quickly.
Thank you, Jesse. And I think if Deb was here, she would be referencing the launch of the Ownership Hub tomorrow, which is very explicitly a pilot, if you like, between Co-ops UK and EOA to focus on a specific area and to really start to demonstrate what kind of catalytic effect, if you like, the sector can itself put in to sort of drive that level of local interest. And it's got buy-in from the local authority, from the city region, from the LEP, the local enterprise partnership, and so on. So I think hopefully that will be a real exemplar, a real demonstrator of what's possible, and we can start to spread that to other areas. And I think I can probably safely commit on behalf of EOA that between us and OAW, we'll bring you the evidence that we get from that experiment and show you exactly what can be achieved. Right, conscious of your time and trying to kind of maybe put together some questions that are coming through. And I've got at least 2 I'd like to put to you before we lose you, if that's okay. So one is that, I think there's something around some risks to the growth of the sector if people focus too heavily on tax breaks, and what other roles there are for people to play, and what role do businesses beyond JLP have in pushing that. So I'm pulling together a set of things there that sort of say, right, let's park government for a minute, let's park public sector. What are the other levers that are really going to escalate the scaling up of the sector at this point? And how do we make sure that any reviews of CGT tax reliefs and so on don't come after the EOT?
Thanks. Again, you'll know much more about this than I do. I would have thought that, obviously, we've talked about central government, we've talked about local government and other areas. What does that leave? It leaves the private and voluntary sectors. It leaves existing employee-owned businesses and their experience, and of course mutuals and cooperatives in some respects have very similar kinds of experience. It leaves success stories, which we're already starting to see, you've touched on, which aren't just about, it's quite important, not just about also the warm feelings of solidarity and support, but also about concrete economic outcomes, more efficient businesses, more resilience in the downturn, better retention of staff in a world where job quality, high quality work is coming under increasing pressure from different forms of change. So I think those kinds of messages, we need to find ways, you need to find ways of proselytizing even above what you're doing now. I think there is a colossal opportunity. I think my kids' generation, the yearning for mission, the yearning for ethos is overwhelming. And I just wonder if it wouldn't be possible to create, and I don't think anyone on the school is probably young enough to be able to do it, a social media undertow where those young people are saying, hold on a second, I don't want to work for a business that isn't employee. I don't want to work for a business that hasn't got a very strong ethos that might lead it to employee ownership or respect that status of work, even if it isn't formally employee owned. Those employee ownership values starting to percolate. I think there must be a scope for a kind of bottom up, Snapchat, Instagram-led type change in the mood music. Because one thing we do know about the economy at the moment is it's very short of, as it rebounds, there's a tremendous appetite to hire, high quality people and to focus on training and improvement. So all of this stuff I think fits incredibly well with the employee ownership agenda. You train someone more if you know they're going to be with you a long time. Frankly, the work we've done in raising minimum wage has had a very positive effect because it gives companies more incentive to train and support someone. They're paying them more. They have a bit more mutual, as it were, skin in the game. But I think employee ownership can go to the next stage of that. And as we start to think about the business development process and the way in which those people can be accelerated in their own careers and the way they're thinking about their own companies, I think that's quite a powerful moral as well as an economic message to give them.
Yeah, Campbell, if I could just jump in there, I totally agree, especially around the generational piece. I think there is a very strong message to be crafted to reach the sort of early 20s type people who are looking for something different. They're looking, this sense of mission is really resonates. I think they really are looking for something more than just a job. They're looking for a purpose. They're looking for a business that's got a purpose, that's doing something that resonates with them. And then you then put into the mix employee ownership and the fact that they then become part of it and they become a kind of stakeholder in the organization itself. It's a very powerful message. I think the stories are really important, and I think possibly what we need to do and we should be doing over the next few years is just trying to build the body of work around stories that people have experienced. And I think it's really important to talk about also about the challenges that you have when you move into employee ownership, so that people really get a sense of, yes, this is a serious thing that I'm doing, and it comes with lots of good things and lots of really positive things, but there are these challenges. And if more businesses can talk about those challenges, I think lots of people coming into the sector would not have to go through some of the challenges that others have gone through, because they can foresee those things happening to them. But I think the stories, and this is one of the the messages to all of the members here today is to just, when engaging with the association and when talking to the association or talking to colleagues or peers, it's that story, it's the narrative that makes employee ownership so powerful and really engages people and gets those who are thinking about it or have never heard about it thinking, yeah, that person sounds like me. They've got my kind of challenges, my kind of issues, and yet they're doing something very different. They're doing something really interesting. I'd like to know more about it. So I would agree entirely with that.
Thanks very much, Chris. Right, Jesse, I'm going to try and pull together sort of two or three questions into one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint a little picture for you, and just invite you to respond to it. So we've had some questions around the importance of that link to the sort of good business, responsible business agenda. We've had some reference to, you know, how employee ownership ought to be positioned, given where we are as a country in terms of the need for economic recovery, but also social recovery. And actually, at the think tank, at Ownership at Work, we have been wrestling with this question of why EO, why now? You know, what is it? Why do we think intuitively that this is such a relevant thing, given where we are as we climb out of this pandemic? And our answer to that, I think, has been to sort of broaden the understanding of what employee ownership can deliver. And I feel we've touched on it, but we haven't quite been explicit about it. And so, Chris talked about the benefits to individuals, the benefits to businesses, to companies, and the benefits to the economy. But I really, really want to be able to bring out the benefits to people beyond just a bit more money in their bank account, you know, to really materially demonstrate that social impact on individuals in terms of financial literacy, because people share business information, in terms of that investment in development and skills, in terms of that sense of well-being because of what, you know, the feeling that you get from working in a company in which you're also an owner. But then actually beyond that, the role that we play in communities when assets are, corporate assets and wealth are typically retained in local communities through a transition to employee ownership. And then actually, and we have a question which explicitly touches on this, the way in which the nature of sharing ownership is actually starting to tackle some of those underlying structural pieces around wealth and income inequality and asset ownership that the pandemic has really shone a spotlight on. So actually we're adding to those layers of individuals, companies and economy, and we're actually saying, well, let's put communities in there as well. Let's put societal fairness in there as well. And if we can start to build the evidence against those, then I really think we can reposition just what kind of an impact this business model could have more broadly in the economy. So sorry to steal a bit of time there, but I've tried to put my arms around a handful of things, and I welcome your views, your response to that.
Well, thank you, Campbell. I think you've said this an awful lot better in many ways than I could, but let me pick up a couple of things that just occur to me while you're discussing this. I do think that there is a deep preoccupation that people have at the moment about the nature of business, the nature of capitalism, the nature of our economic arrangements. And they think about oppression, they think about victimization, they think about inequality, they think about environmental effects. And anything that the sector can do that brings out the employee ownership effect in relation to some of these key concerns is going to be of enormous value. And let me just think about that. So one of them would be the question of whether employee-owned businesses are more frugal with their resources than their equivalents. I think we all know of businesses, employee-owned businesses, where people basically say, well, look, I never really minded, the loss of a bit of stuff in the back when I was just working here, but now I am a co-owner. I'm not standing for it. You know what I mean? We're going to have, we've got to take responsibility for that. So I think there's an issue about frugality and living with your environment, and possibly with greenery more generally, that's potentially an opportunity. And since the environment is the overwhelming concern of a vast number of people in this country in a way that it never was even 10 years ago, and since it's the overwhelming concern of the younger people in our society, and since it fits perfectly with that sense of mission, I think that's a really important and to my mind, so far at least, somewhat uncharted territory to be more explored. The other one I would look at would be the link between employee ownership and mental well-being. Because, let me give you a little example. I'm trying to set up a university in Herefordshire, and we call the New Model in Technology and Engineering. And with God's good grace, we will open our doors in September. It's a completely new model of how to think about training someone in engineering. And, Professor Mcdermott doesn't get you for 2 hours on a Tuesday. He, or indeed maybe she, because it's a 50-50 university in terms of gender all the way up, gets you for 3.5 weeks to work on a specific project or set of projects, practical work with a theoretical component, working in teams. I think it's an incredibly interesting way. We want that employee ownership ethos that we've discussed today to be percolating through that institution, because we want a all hands on deck feeling of common ownership across the university. The reason I mention it is because in America, the parallel case, the institution that we've lifted so much of our own ideas from with NMIT, as it's called, is called Olin College. Olin College have a course that goes like this. You do early on now Olin College was nothing, didn't exist 30 years ago. It's now one of the top 3 engineering colleges in America. And they have a course, and the course goes like this. You arrive, and the course instruction is find some people and help them. Find some people and help them. And your job is to think about who are those people, what are their needs, what are they telling their needs, what is the client, what's the real brief here, and how can I make a positive difference in their lives? The result of that is that at Olin, compared to many other colleges in America that are parallels, levels of mental well-being are far greater, because kids do not want to work on the theory only of engineering. They want to work on fixing people's problems. They want to work on things that show autonomy, mastery, and purpose. All of those 3 things that we know are fundamental to people's well-being. So I think if the EOA and the employee ownership movement more generally can start to think about colonizing those links to the environment and to mental well-being, that would be a really interesting way to take the agenda forward. And I'm afraid, having said that, I hope you'll excuse me, but I've got to go into a parliamentary committee, and I'm going to get shot, literally shot, well, not quite literally, but almost literally shot if I don't turn up.
Jesse, look, thank you ever so much for your time. I have obviously failed to do justice to all the questions we have. With your permission, we might share a few of those that we didn't get to via your office, if that's okay. I won't be replying to them as from my office for obvious reasons, but I will. No, but if you see them and however we figure it out. But yeah, look, thank you so much for your thoughts. Thank you on behalf of EOA. Chris, I don't know if you wanted to say a final word to Jesse.
Yes, I mean, just echoing Campbell there. Thank you so much. Very, very thoughtful, very, very touching, and as I said right at the start, quite beautiful. I thought the conversation was. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
How extremely kind of you to say that. It's been a great pleasure for me, and it's an absolute honor to be able to pay tribute to Robert and to all your work. Thank you so much.
Take good care. Right. So look, I'm just going to repeat what I said just then, which is I did my best to try and bundle in as many questions or dimensions of questions as I could. So apologies to those who've asked and flagged questions and they haven't quite gone to Jesse as you might have wished. We will find a way to smuggle some questions to him and see if
Campbell, if I could just
add answers. Yeah, go on.
If I could just add in there, I think Jesse's really onto something in terms of the discussion around I know this is quite a big thing to say, but the future of capitalism and where it's going and how under attack it seems to be at the moment from various quarters. And I think EO and I think EOA's got almost a responsibility to pitch the tent right in the middle of that discussion and right in the middle of those conversations and talks to really show that there is a way of doing it. There is a way of running businesses, owning businesses that can be competitive, that can be innovative, that can be dynamic, and you can do that without some of the or all of the negativity that can come through or is coming through at the moment through capitalism. So I think another one of the things that we've got to do over the next 10 years is really build that tent and fill it, make it bigger and bigger, and fill it with people who can tell their stories and can kind of lived it and breathed it, and also can relate to people outside the tent who might be looking in.
Listen, Chris, you're preaching to the choir, as you know, with me. I mean, you know, and at the risk of sort of sounding self-serving, this is absolutely bang in kind of ownership of works bailiwick. This is precisely what we're trying to do. My own theory is that if we can build that evidence base of those richer dimensions of impact, then it becomes very, very hard for Treasury to say no. You know, kind of we you know, they'll definitely protect what we've got. You know, it makes it much easier to win that argument with local enterprise partnerships, with combined authorities and so on, to say this has a manifest positive impact on local community and economy. So so completely agree on that. So we've a little more time than we thought, but only a few minutes, and I suspect that is sort of probably our luxury, which is because and our privilege, if you like, because it gives us a chance to talk to Kevin as Robert's biographer. Now, Kevin, before I move on to you, Chris, I think you're going to do a sort of outro for us, aren't you? So after Kevin's spoken, you're going to do a bit of a wrap up, and you'll have a chance then to kind of hit any themes that you want to that we haven't done justice to.
I will do, yes.
Okay, great. So Kevin, you are writing a biography of Robert, and I just hopefully this is a lovely chance for everybody to hear some of your observations and reflections on the discussion today. Let me hand over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Campbell. On this 10th anniversary of Robert's passing, I regret to have to say I never met Robert Oakeshott in person, though I feel as though I know him pretty well by now. As a historian of African history and a biographer, I first learned about Robert when researching the biography of Patrick van Rensburg, the radical educationist with whom Robert worked and led a student-built school in Botswana in the 1960s. Robert later acknowledged that meeting Pat and Liz van Rensburg was perhaps the most important meeting of his life, for it was through them that he became committed to cooperative and employee ownership principles. I began work on the Robert Oakeshott biography last September, and it's involved research through his voluminous papers and personal correspondence. Thank you, Charlotte Oakeshott, for so generously lending them to me and for sending more heavy bags by courier. But besides archival and newspaper research, I have, as perhaps many people on this program know, I have interviewed 70 people, friends, relatives, and colleagues, including some from Central and Eastern Europe, where Robert made an important contribution during the transition period of the early 1990s, and greetings to those of you from there who've been able to tune in. I've spoken with grassroots organizers, trade unionists, businessmen, academics, aristocrats, and politicians, including the wonderfully generous folk singer Marie Little and today's speaker, Jesse Norman. I agree with Chris in summing up Jesse Norman's talk. It was very moving and seems so appropriate on this anniversary day. I'm glad Jesse referred to the highly successful employee-owned Herend porcelain manufactory in Hungary, for which Robert was very influential in its formation period. I have spoken with young executive Laszlo Seste, who is now commercial director about who was Robert's guide and interpreter in those years. The biography is shaping into an analytical narrative of Robert's whole life. And while there will be much focus on the issues discussed today and his role as a unique pioneer of employee ownership, I am currently writing up the first half of Robert's life, the period that is so crucial to understanding the evolution of his personality and ideas. And here his personal correspondence, mostly to his mother, is invaluable. I have found Robert to be a kind, generous, and eccentric personality, not only great in ideas and dedicated to hard work, but also very attractive socially, especially his wide-ranging intellect combined inextricably with his great sense of humour, often leading to the ridiculous. Robert was at the height of his job ownership work and was taking some friends and colleagues to visit the great Mondragon cooperative complex in northern Spain when an interesting event occurred. They stopped off in Bordeaux to visit his friend Eric Rothschild of Chateau Lafitte Rothschild. And at dinner that night, Robert found himself sitting next to the world-famous star of silver screen, Greta Garbo. According to Eric Rothschild, they seemed to get on extremely well, bearing in mind that Robert actually had a third cousin who was also a star of the silver screen. When asked on his return to England what it was like meeting Greta Garbo, Robert replied, "Not a patch on Aunt Emily." Aunt Emily was a much favoured maternal aunt, undaunted by anything, who ran a farm in England. As Jesse Norman said, Robert's transparent goodness was always very evident. All the people that I have spoken to had enormous regard and even love for Robert. It's been a great privilege working on his biography. And I particularly like Jesse Norman's emphasis on Robert being a master of well-lubricated conversation, in which all participants are equal, and what matters is its content and richness. Thank you very much for inviting me to say a few words. I hope to finish writing the biography by the end of this year, and it will be published sometime next year. Thank you.
Huge thanks for that, Kevin. That was lovely to hear that. Really charming, and I think we'll speak for everybody when I say I look forward to having the opportunity to read the final bit, the final book when it's published. So thank you very much indeed. So in our final few minutes, so I would like to do one thing very quickly, which is that there was a lovely comment in the Q&A, which was not a question, but was a compliment paid to Deb and to everyone in the EOA team for everything that they have done to promote the model and the success that they've had. So allow me as someone who's not part of the EOA in that same way, just to flag that. It got a number of likes. So to all of the EOA team who are on this, and guys, I know you'll pass this on to Deb, but please, I'm sure that compliment is extended by everybody who's taken part today. And then finally, I'm going to hand over to Chris just to say a few final words. And Chris, I wondered if you might pick up one question that was in the Q&A, which was how members can support the EOA in its mission to grow the sector. Lots and lots of advocates on this call, but as we know, when people look in from outside, sometimes they don't instinctively get it. And I think we've all got a part to play in that. And maybe if I could leave that one with you. Many thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Campbell. Yeah, there's some absolutely brilliant questions have come through. I just wish we had another hour or so that we could go through them and discuss them and talk and chat about them, because there's some really interesting questions, some really searching questions, and some very thoughtful questions that people viewing today have sent through. And I'm really thank you for those. They're really great. I'm sorry we've not been able to get to all of them. But on that question of what can members do, well, I suppose some of it is the obvious in terms of being advocates, but I think it's probably more than that. It's engaging with the association. And I think, to be fair to the association, and part of the strategy work that we've been looking at and doing, is how can the EOA engage more with the members? How can it help members to grow and learn and develop around the employee ownership message? And I think there's work for us to do to help the members to be better equipped and better able to be the advocates that they want to be. Perhaps they don't quite know who to speak to or where to go or how to do it. And I think there's a responsibility for us to be able to help members do that. But it is, I think, as well, as much about having that conversation with somebody or bumping into somebody and talking about the type of business that you've got, the type of business that you're striving to create. Certainly, I know there's lots of EO businesses that are very open to hosting other people to come and talk to them, to see how they do things, and also to ask the searching questions about, and the difficult questions and the questions that people want to ask but probably don't feel it's the right environment to, about where are the pitfalls, where are the challenges. It can't all just be fantastic and rosy. There's got to be issues, and there are. And I think it's important when we're telling the stories and we're advocating for employee ownership, that we're very honest about the challenges and the issues as well, because otherwise people won't believe us. They'll just think it's some utopia that I don't want to be involved in. So I think there is work. There's lots of work to do with the media. There's work within government. There is a whole spectrum of things, and please, as members, be rest assured that these are the questions and these are the challenges that the team and the EOA has been wrestling with as it's been devising its new strategy for the next 5 years. So we are thinking about all of those questions, and we are thinking about those challenges. But it really does fall to me to, here at 2:25 on Monday, it falls to me to close the session today. I must say, it's been really a really great session. I'm coming away from it feeling very humbled and very privileged to be the chair of an organisation like this, with such passionate people in it now, but also incredible people and incredible stories and incredible legacies of people that have built the organisation to where it is, and the impact and the work they've done. I hope that we are good custodians of that we are enthusiastic custodians of the ideas and the concepts, but also, as we take things forward, we can be innovative and we can see the world and face the world as it is today and the challenges that we face today. And certainly we were talking earlier around, how do we get to that generational piece? How do we get down to people just coming into work to talk to them about employee ownership? So very privileged to be in this position, very humbled to have the opportunity to be part of this story and to be part of this journey. So I'd like to thank Jesse and I'd like to thank Kevin very much for their contribution today, particularly Jesse for those lovely words and those lovely memories of Robert Oakeshott. Absolutely beautifully put. I'd also, of course, like to thank Campbell for stepping in at the very last moment to host the event today, and he did a sterling job, a really brilliant professional job. So thank you so much to Campbell. Also, thank you to Gripple for their support for us to be able to put this all together. So again, thanks to the guys at Gripple for getting involved and helping us out. There is the post-networking event via Remo, and that will kick off as soon as we finish in a minute or two. So the idea is that a virtual, go into a room, grab a coffee, go over to a table and start chatting to people. You can do it virtually rather than in real life. And then I think apparently you can move from table to table and you can chat and talk and ponder the things that you've heard today and discuss in the conversations more about what we're trying to do. Of course, it's the EO Day on the 25th of June. So this is EO week. So if you'd like to join the EOA on the 25th of June at 9 o'clock for a coffee, hear about some EOA stories, EO stories, the latest stats that will be coming out, and make sure you join the Thunderclap at 1 p.m. Someone had to explain to me what the Thunderclap was, because I literally thought it was we were all going to get big clappers and go into the car park, but apparently it's not. It's something different. And if you need information about that, please contact Keely or Ross at the EOA for more information. As Campbell has mentioned, tomorrow is the launch of the Ownership Hub. This is our collaboration with Cooperatives UK, and it's a project working with economic regions to grow employee ownership and worker ownership. The project is part of the campaign to effect a 5-fold increase in the number of employees and worker owners in the UK to create 1 million owners. And so we are very excited about that. And if you would like to attend, you want to find out about the launch, then please get in touch with Anne or Keely or Ross at the EOA to get some more details. Finally, there's still time to book for the next ESG series. This one's called the G in ESG, and that's on Thursday. So please go to the events section of the EOA website to get some more details about that. You've just about got time. And just to let you know that we have been recording this session today, and we will, as soon as we can, make it available for people to come back and watch and listen and ruminate on. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who's attended today. Thank you to Jesse, thank you to Kevin, thank you to Campbell, and thank you to Gripple for supporting the event. Everybody have a great EO Day week running up to EO Day on Friday. Have a wonderful time on Friday. Absolutely celebrate and enjoy and really make the most of our special day of the year. And so thanks everybody, and hope to see you at some point in the not too distant future face to face. Thank you.